Yesterday, who had just gone down into Egypt? Son of Jacob.
Joseph.
Joseph. And did he go there on purpose?
No.
How did he get there?
Slaves.
Okay, Griff is the answer person for you today. He was a slave. And what eventually did he become in Egypt? John?
The vizier.
The vizier. And what job did he have that was related to the reason he became vizier? What was he given to do? What did he need to do?
Store food for the family.
Right. So he needed to store food for the famine because it was going to be how many years of plenty? How many years of good crops?
7.
7. And then how many years of famine?
7.
7. Now, yesterday I showed you a picture of what is left still today of Joseph's storehouses. So this is, about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And you can still see it. You can still see his pyramid, which I believe was probably for him, probably his tomb. We do know, as we get to the end of the book of Genesis, that he died, and you've read this, so what happened to him at the end? After he died, what did they do? What happened to him?
It says he was buried in a continent in Egypt.
Yeah, so he was mummified, because he was an important person. Number 2 in the country. So he was mummified and put into a tomb. What tomb? I suspect it's probably that one. And then we haven't read yet, we didn't read yet in Exodus what will happen. But when the children of Israel leave Egypt, they take, among other things, they take Joseph's body with them. So there's nobody in that pyramid today. All right, so I told you that today we would move on to something else that Joseph built besides the storehouses, which I thought was very interesting. Here is a canal that he built in order to bring the boats here, so bring the grain there for the storehouses. Makes sense, right? Now, what else are you going to need when there is a famine? Besides grain for food, you're going to need water, right? Because presumably there is a drought because there's no water, right? You see why? If you're living on the Nile River, the only reason there would not be the ability to grow crops is if there's no flooding, right? Which means there's no water coming from the mountains of Africa down to the delta in the Mediterranean Sea. So that means there's no water. So Joseph is smart enough to figure out that not only do we need grain set aside, but we also need water. So this is what he did. This is a picture from space. Okay, you can see here along the Nile River, see how green that is? Because it's right near the river, so things grow there. Notice this is another green area here, and you see this? Can you tell by the color of that compared to the color of other things similar what that might be?
Body of water.
It's a body of water. And we have a small body of water surrounded by land. What do we usually call that? No, an oasis would be much smaller. Where there's a little bit of water around desert. What do you call any land and there's a body of water there? We have them in Ohio. A lake, right? Was that a hard question? A lake. Joseph built a lake. Isn't that something? How many of you have ever heard that before? Yeah, me either. I was 3 years old before I heard about Joseph's lake. I've been in church all my life. Never heard about Joseph's lake. I went to a Christian college. Never heard about Joseph's lake. I went to seminary. Never heard about Joseph's lake. But when I was in Egypt, I heard about Joseph's lake. And here's a close-up. From outer space, you can see that big lake. Now, what did he do? You can tell here. Here's the Nile River. Can you see it? And he built a canal from the Nile River over to here. This was an area that already had a natural depression. so he didn't have to dig. Now today, if people make a man-made lake, sometimes they have to bring in bulldozers and, hollow out an area. But this was an area that already was deep, a depression of the earth. So he saw that and he realized, all I got to do is get water there and I can fill it up and I'll have a lake. And that's what he did. He brought the water over, and this whole area now, it has water apparently from the water that was coming over, and he filled up this lake so that they had fresh water during the 7 years. Isn't that something? And it's still there today. Some people don't think that Joseph existed, but there it is. There's the lake that he constructed. Here's a picture of the lake. And can you tell it looks pretty big, doesn't it? It was a big lake. There's a boat out there, but I don't think that there's any fishing, because what I was told is that because this lake doesn't have an outlet, that it's become brackish. It's become laden with minerals, which is the same thing that happened to what other lake we call a sea. What other lake do you know of that doesn't have an outlet, so it became very salty, mineral laden? In Israel, sort of near Jerusalem, right by Masada. Nothing lives in it. What? The Dead Sea. You've heard of the Dead Sea, right? Have you heard of the Dead Sea?
Yeah.
Okay. Why is it called that? Because nothing lives in it, because it's so full of salt minerals. I don't imagine any of you have been over to the Dead Sea, have you? Okay. Maybe someday you can go. If you do, I have something for you to do. Something that somebody told me before. This is way off the subject here. I'll tell you anyway. You know that you float. You can't sink in the Dead Sea. Do you know that? Because it's so full of minerals. And one of the guys on the tour with me said, just start walking from the shore, and when your feet can't touch, just keep walking. So I thought, well, that sounds crazy, but that's what I did. I walked, I'm in the water, I'm walking. Pretty soon, I'm not touching the floor, the ground, but I'm still walking. Still the same, just keep walking. You still stay upright because you can't sink. All right, it's pretty neat. Anyway, that's what this sea is becoming. And so the Egyptian government is thinking about just draining it, which is too bad, because it is a nice monument, if you will, to what Joseph was able to do. All right, so that's Joseph. He was in Egypt. He was the vizier of Egypt. We see the things that he constructed from the storehouses to this lake. We know that he was there. He did it, just like the Bible said. All right, any questions about Joseph? Now, at some point, and I'm not sure when Joseph died, but before he died, what happened with his family? Well, you just read this. Mia, what happened to his family? Yeah, but before that, I should back up a little bit. What did Joseph ever see his brothers again? No? Did you read Genesis? Then you shouldn't be answering the questions incorrectly. Yeah, his brothers came to get grain. Remember, there was a famine.
Oh, like that.
They came.
Oh, I thought.
They came to get grain. They didn't recognize him. Remember all that? And eventually, Joseph reveals himself to them, and he says, "Bring down our father." So Jacob comes down, or Israel as he's called, and all his sons, all his family come down there, 70 people in all, and they come and live in Israel. I showed you a picture before, the land of Goshen, where they live. All right, so that's where we leave them in that part of what's going on in history. So at some point after Joseph dies, and probably in that generation of people dies, the middle kingdom falls apart. And we enter into another time in between the major kingdom periods called an intermediate period. This is the second intermediate period. And this is brought about by an invasion. So this one, there's not civil war in Egypt, but there's a people that invade them, and they're called the Hyksos. Can you say Hyksos? Hyksos. All right, the word right there. They were called, and that's a word in Egyptian for foreign chiefs. Now, what's interesting about these Hyksos is that they were a ruling class of Semitics from Syria, Palestine. Not sure exactly where, but from up around the land of Canaan, and largely Amorites. All right, let's break this down. First of all, what are Semitics or Semites? From whom do Semites descend? Who is their great-great-great-great-grandfather? If you're a Semite, to whom are you related? If you put sh there instead of just an S, to whom are you related? Mia? Shem. You remember Shem? Who was Shem? Who was Shem, Stephen? Speak up. We got to hear you. One of the three brothers? One of the three stooges? No? Japheth was another brother. And Ham was another brother. So was that a singing group or what? What are these three brothers? Who are they? Who are these three brothers, Noah? Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Amelia, who are they? Matthew, who are they? What are we doing in our Bible classes? And in our history classes? Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Mia, who are they? Noah's sons.
Oh, yeah. Oh, but that was 2 weeks ago. I can't remember that.
The sons of Noah, you should remember. Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Shem is the ancestor of the Shemites or Semites. So these Hyksos that came into Egypt and conquered Egypt are Semitic or Semites. That means they're related to what people that are already in Egypt? If they're Semites, they're related to what people already in Egypt? Just guess.
Jews.
Well, there's no such thing as Jews yet. The Hebrew people. Why? Because Abraham was also Semitic. Abraham was a descendant of Shem. So that means the Hyksos and the Israelites are related. They're Semites. What are the people in Egypt? They're not Semites. What are they? They're not descendants of Shem. They're descendants of whom? You got a choice of two.
Ham.
Ham. Good guess. And can you distinguish? Could you distinguish pretty much between Hamites and Semites by looking at them? You all saying yes? How? How? Stephen, how? You're not telling me anything. What's the difference? How can you tell the difference, John?
Skin color.
Skin color. What's what?
Hamites were really dark skinned and Shemites were like
Sort of medium, brownish.
yeah.
Not as white as some of us may be. All right, so you can tell the difference. All right, so the Hyksos come in, they invade, they take over Egypt. The Hebrew people, the Israelites that are there, are distant relatives. We also know that these Semitics are a particular kind of Semites. They are Amorites. They're called Amorites. That's a particular branch of the Semites. Now, should I ask the question? Where have we seen Amorites before? Zach?
Ancient Babylon.
Yes! Babylon! And specifically, in what realm of Babylon, or what civilization of Babylon? What did we call that particular civilization of Babylon that was that took over? The Amorites took over. Zach?
Acadians.
You're thinking Chaldean? No, that's not what it's called. The period is called the Old Babylonian Empire. Remember?
Yeah.
Old Babylonian Empire was the Amorites. The Amorites came in and took over from those that were the Sumerians and the others that were in the Mesopotamian Valley. The Amorites came in. So now whether these are related, whether they came from that area near Babylon all the way over to Egypt, or whether they just spread out over into Palestine area and eventually came down into Egypt, not sure. But they were probably Amorites. All right? Are you with me? They established a capital at Avaris. That's not really that important for us. But what's interesting is some of the names of their rulers. One of the names of their rulers was this. Would anybody like to try to pronounce that? Okay, very good. Now, if I told you that in Hebrew there is no such letter as J, it really should be a Y. Does that sound like anything like a Hebrew name? Say it again, Zach.
Yakur.
Okay, now put the accent on the first syllable.
Akur.
Put more on the first syllable.
Akur.
You're saying it the same way still. Say the first syllable strong and then back down on the next two.
Yakur.
Okay, now, does that sound like anything you know?
I don't know, that's just.
Yaakov. Does that sound like any Hebrew name you know? How about if you took this last part off?
Yahweh.
No. Keep this. Just drop the last syllable. Mia? Yes, Jacob. Jacob. So one of the rulers of the Hyksos name was Jacob. Now, not the same Jacob we know, but that just shows the similarity in language and in names. Okay? All right, so that's the Hyksos. Now, one thing the Hyksos brought with them was a new kind of warfare, and that was warfare using chariots. Now, one of the problems that some scholars point out with the Bible is that in Genesis, it talks about there being chariots in Egypt before this time. And so they say, see, the Bible's wrong. It has chariots. We know the Hyksos were the ones that brought chariots in. Well, when you come across something like that, of course, you begin to ask questions, what could be the possible explanations? And if you're looking for answers, you can find them. If you want to find problems, then you can find those too. I think there's several possibilities here. First of all, remember when Moses is writing the book of Genesis, did you know that Moses wrote the book of Genesis? I'm not seeing much recognition there. Moses wrote it long after this. And so when he's describing something that took place long before this, he might have used a word that was later to describe something that was earlier. You follow what I'm saying? So even though they didn't have chariots, that may have been the closest word he could think of to describe some kind of wagon that they did have, or some kind of way of getting around. The other thing is that the Egyptians may have had chariots, just didn't use them for warfare. They just used them for getting around, like a golf cart or something. But the Hyksos brought in the idea of using them in war. So I think there are two good possible explanations as to why the word chariot appears. Okay, so that's not a big deal, but just a lesson in trying to find answers instead of centering in on what might be a problem and jump to conclusion. Okay, so the Hyksos came in. Here, this map shows what they controlled. They didn't conquer Upper Egypt, but they conquered Lower Egypt, and they also had control of the Sinai Peninsula on up into the land of Canaan. What's this right here? That body of water right there? Anybody? Everybody? Somebody?
Let's see.
What?
That's it.
That's the Dead Sea.
Griffin, say it loud. Jeez.
Were we just talking about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's the Dead Sea, and here's the Jordan River. It flows down from here. What is that? Where Jesus spent most of his ministry, up in this area. The Sea of Galilee. Flows down, the Dead Sea, and it stops right there. Okay, so the Hyksos controlled all this area. So you can see it. They're quite a powerful group. They had control over a wide range. There have been several things found that come from the Hyksos. Here's a princess crown that's been found. You might enjoy that. And this is some different pottery and things that were found in Egypt, indicating the presence of the Hyksos. All right, so the Hyksos were in control then during this intermediate period. They were eventually driven out by an Egyptian by the name of Ahmose. Ahmose the First. We see him right here. Now, something interesting happened when he drove out the Hyksos. By the way, he pursued them all the way to the Negev, which is south of the land of Canaan or Israel, and defeated them. And then he establishes the New Kingdom period. But there were other people besides the Hyksos in Egypt that were Semites, in addition to the Hebrews. Now, if you're an Egyptian and you've been under the control of the Hyksos for hundreds of years, and you finally drive them out, but a lot of their relatives are still there, what would you do? And you can tell who they are because they look different than you. What would you do?
Drive them out.
Drive them out too. Why would you drive the relatives out?
They didn't do anything.
What do you think, Zach?
Because they're the same blood as people.
Yeah, so you don't trust them,
Yeah.
right? They might try to sneak the Hyksos back in again, or they might rebel against you. So he did one of two things to all the other Semite people. He either drove them out as well, or he enslaved them. Keeps control over them. Now, who do we know that were made slaves in Egypt that were Semitic? Do we know anybody that fits that?
Moses.
And? Just him?
No.
Just one guy?
Hebrews.
The Hebrew people, the Israelites, right? Remember the Israelites? How Jacob's family all came down to Egypt and they lived in the land of Goshen. They are distant relatives of the Amorites, and so when Ahmose the First drove out the Hyksos and drove out other Semites, he enslaved some of the Semites that were left, and that would have included the Israelites. You see? Now we understand why they were enslaved. See, when we read the Bible, we see that they were enslaved, and it's not really important that we understand why, but it sure is interesting to see how that fits into history, isn't it? That we know the guy that enslaved Semitic people in Egypt. All right, so we know what happened. What happened with the Israelite people at this time. Now, the other things we can find out about the New Kingdom period is the central power was established. In other words, all the power was brought back into one place again. The Pharaoh is in control. Everybody's underneath him. It was during this time that we have the greatest imperial expansion. What that means is that during this time is when Egypt expanded their territory and conquered other places more than any other time in their history. And it was virtually a military state. That means that the military, the army, soldiers were everywhere and keeping control over the people. So Amhos I and his successors had total control of the country. Everybody follow? You got the picture of what's going on, what it's like? All right, this shows us some pictures of the Egyptian army and the expansion. You can see that they have conquered Upper Egypt as well as Lower Egypt, and they've conquered up into the same areas that the Hyksos had, only further. Look, they're going past the Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, on up, almost up into Turkey. So they have quite an area. Here's some of the weapons that they used, and a chariot that was used, a New Kingdom chariot. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spokes on the wheels. That might be interesting later. Okay? Yeah, any of those weapons appeal to you?
What pharaoh would it have been in that time?
All right, Amhos I is the one who drives out the Hyksos. Okay, now we're going to get to the next pharaoh. Okay, that's what you want to get to the next one, and then the
I
last one.
wouldn't know who had that.
During this would have been any of them during this New Kingdom period. Not sure we can pin it down to just one, and they would have had that throughout the period. Remember, they got the chariot idea from the Hyksos, and so they used that. Okay, so we have Amhos I, and then his son is Amenhotep I. Now, he is interesting because he is a pharaoh that is not mentioned by name, but it is mentioned in Exodus chapter 1. When you read it, and as you are to read for tomorrow in Exodus, take note that the first pharaoh that's mentioned there in verses 8 through 14 is Amenhotep I. In fact, you might want to write that in your Bible so you have that permanently in there, see who that was. Now, unfortunately, when we're reading in Exodus, we see Pharaoh did this, Pharaoh did this, Pharaoh did that, and we kind of assume it's all the same guy. Just like in the New Testament, every time we see Herod, we think it's all the same guy. But it isn't in either case. So, Amenhotep I is the Pharaoh of Exodus 1, 8 to 14. And then 15 through 22 is another Pharaoh. And that guy's name is Thutmose, or Thutmosis the first. Okay, everybody got it so far? So we're going to stop here because I want to give you a little time to begin reading if you haven't in Exodus. And even if you have, maybe it wouldn't hurt for you to look at it again and tie in these pharaohs as you read. And then tomorrow we're going to come to Thutmose II and Hatshepsut and find out who they are and what they have to do with what the Bible says happens in Egypt concerning the children of Israel, or the Israelites. Any questions? All right. Open your Bibles to Exodus and begin reading, or continue reading, or look over it once again. Don't forget that tomorrow also is when your interim report is due on your reading project, and you should submit that to Google Classroom. The password is on the board. Has everybody been able to log into that? Anybody that has not been able or had trouble? Okay, so the password is there. I gave it to you yesterday as well. Any questions about that?